Hello, everyone, and welcome to Let's Be Neighbors. We bring local experts here to talk about subjects that are important to you. And today we're talking about Great Salt Lake and have a very awesome, very special expert today. We have Hannah Fries, who is the Agricultural Optimization Program Manager for the Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. And it's a really cool program that helps bring water to optimizing food for farmers, and she'll tell you a lot more about it than I can. And so I will actually just straight up introduce her, and we are so happy to have her here on the program today. So thank you for joining us, Hannah.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here. Looking forward to it. So, okay, I will get right into it. Let me share. I have some slides prepared. Okay, thank you for that introduction. Are you good on my slides? Can you see them? Okay, very good. So I'm here today to talk about the Agricultural Water Optimization Program, like mentioned, and I run that for the Department of Ag and Food here in the state of Utah. And so I would just like to start out by mentioning, I know that this specific conversation is around the Great Salt Lake, which is such a valid and very hot topic that we talk about. But I like to bring the point first and foremost that Ag Water Optimization Program is a statewide program. So we're not just focused on the Great Salt Lake Basin, but we're focused on agricultural water all across the state. And with that brings a lot of different challenges and different things that we face as we help our farmers optimize their water use. So the water optimization is kind of meant to be everything for everyone. So as we talk about Great Salt Lake Basin, we have a lot of concerns around the lake, and we want to do our part in the agricultural community to help get water to the lake and to be better with the water that we use in agriculture. But then as we look around the state, we have a whole other world going on, if you will, on the Colorado River that are also facing extreme drought and have water shortages on the Colorado. So we do a lot of work there to help our farmers on the Colorado. And then when we look in central and southern Utah, our farmers irrigate with groundwater, and a lot are in critical groundwater management areas, which means that the groundwater is being depleted faster than it's replenishing, again, because of the drought. And so we work with producers there in the groundwater area. So I like to bring that up first and foremost to shift the focus. Where we are on Great Salt Lake is a huge concern and a huge area of focus, but also we look at places all around the state and the unique water concerns and the water resources we have around the state of Utah. One thing that I also like to point out as we get going is the water optimization program, like I said, is statewide, but a huge majority of the interest that we get in the program is located right here in the Great Salt Lake Basin. So we just closed an application period, and it's been consistent with every application period that we have had, and 47.7% of all of our applications are in Cache County, Box Elder County, and Rich County, which make up a huge area of agriculture within the Great Salt Lake Basin. So over almost half of all of the applications are located right here. So we can see that this is where the need is. This is where the water is in a lot of instances. And so we spend a lot of time and do a lot of work in Great Salt Lake Basin. So let's see if I can get my slides to advance here. As we move forward, I'll just take a minute and explain what the program is and how it works, and the things that we do in water optimization to help our farmers and then also help the water resources that we have in the state. So as you can see here, just a few little bullet points. The optimization program is a grant program that we provide to agricultural water users. So that's kind of the world that we work in. There's lots of different water users in the state, but we focus on those that have agricultural irrigation water rights or water shares. I'll talk about the differences between those in just a little bit. The grant program is 50-50 cost share. So a producer will come make application, propose a project, and then they are expected to come up with 50% of the costs on their own, and the state of Utah will then pay 50% of the project costs as well. All of our projects require real-time flow meters. So those are at the farm level. Most agricultural systems, or all agricultural systems at the canal or irrigation share level, are metered, but not so much on farm. So this has been a new opportunity for us to meter water use specifically on individual farms, individual fields, and all projects are required to have those meters. We do a lot of work with our irrigation and canal companies as well. Those companies have up to $1 million per application cycle that they can apply for. And on-farm applicants, so our farm scale projects, can apply up to $500,000 per application cycle. And then our ranking priorities are set by a committee that we have that I'll introduce to you, our Agricultural Water Optimization Committee. And that committee sets, priorities, they set project types, project location, and you can see here some of the priorities that they set for which projects should be funded and which maybe wouldn't be funded through the program. One of our priority areas is Great Salt Lake Basin. Another priority area, like I talked just quickly earlier, is the critical groundwater management areas. And then another priority is we have types of water savings, or what are these projects going to do with the water that they save. So just a quick overview of how the program works there. Next, I'll introduce the Water Optimization Committee. This is the governing body of the Agricultural Water Optimization Program. So everything we do, every decision that we make, every funding grant that is issued comes from a vote of this committee. And I like to introduce this committee because these are some really heavy hitters that we have in the state of Utah, people that are of influence and are in the know, and they themselves are serving on these committees just to show the need that we have for agricultural water optimization and what a hot topic that it is, and the potential that we have to help our water resources around the state. So we have Commissioner Craig Butters, who serves as the Commissioner of Utah Department of Agriculture and Food. Teresa Wilhelmsen is the Director of Division of Water Rights and also serves as the State Engineer. Candace Hassenjaeger is the Director of Division of Water Resources. Dr. Ken White is the Dean of the College of Agriculture and Applied Sciences at Utah State University. William Merkley serves as our Water Conservancy District representative. He is out in the Uinta Basin, and so it's kind of serves also as our Colorado River representative on the committee. And then the last four are near and dear to my heart. These are farmers from around the state of Utah that are serving on this committee. It's totally voluntary, and each of these four individuals make their living solely from agriculture. So Jason Morgan represents our conservation districts around the state. Jeff Hardy serves as our vice chairman and represents Northern Utah agriculture. Brett Bunker serves as our chairman. He represents Central Utah agriculture. And Brandon Yardley serves as our Southern Utah agricultural representative. And I like to point out where they're located because, like I talked earlier, agriculture and water use is so different depending on where you're at in the state. And so we love to have a good spread of representatives from around the state there. So to quickly highlight some of the projects that we've done through the Water Optimization Program, I probably sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it really depends on where you're at in the state of Utah. Up in northern Utah, specifically in Box Elder and Weber counties, we are piping a lot of ditches. So we have earthen ditches that run water to fields, and we're enclosing those with pipe. That greatly reduces evaporation loss and reduces the time that it takes for water to get from the canal to a crop field. We're doing a lot of canal work and automating canal systems so that when a storm happens and maybe the canal is full, or if there's a heavy rain event and farmers are not irrigating, those canal systems can automatically limit the water that's being taken from a reservoir if it's not being used on farm. And so we can do that really quickly in real time, whereas before it might have taken 4 or 5 days to regulate those canals. In central and southern Utah, we do a lot of sprinkler irrigation system. Also in Cache Valley, we do a lot of sprinkler systems. A lot of the irrigation companies are moving towards pressurizing their canals and completely enclosing them so they're pipes in the ground. And then that irrigation water is pressurized, and we help farmers do their portion on farm with pivots or wheel lines. We do drip systems for some of our vegetable producers and specialty crop producers. We do drip systems also in orchards. And then, like I mentioned, we do some canal linings and pipings of canals as well. There's just a huge benefit there as we work with our canal companies that service so many acres. So All of these projects help our farmers be more efficient. And what that means is that as we become more and more efficient, we may have opportunities to look at utilizing some of our irrigation water elsewhere, and maybe sending some to the Great Salt Lake or leasing some to the Great Salt Lake as we help our farmers be more efficient on their farms with some of those projects. So next, I just like to show really quickly. I think this is interesting. I don't know if you're seeing this, but I'm going to move this over here so you can see the point of the graph. But what this is agricultural imports and exports in the United States. And for the first time in the history of our nation, we are seeing that we are importing more agricultural products into the United States than we are exporting. And the reason that I make this case is because there is value in local agriculture, and there is value in supporting our local farmers to have the capacity to grow food for us. As we learned through the COVID pandemic and other things like that, that sometimes just a little hiccup can really affect the supply chain. And so there's value in being able to support Utah agriculture and have the capacity to grow food here in the state for ourselves and be able to help our neighboring states as well. So let me move that forward. So just to talk about what we have done so far, where we are at in the agricultural optimization program and where we would like to go. So the program started in 2019 and it got an initial funding award of $3 million. Then in 2020 got another $3 million. And then as part of some federal spending, we got allocated $70 million in ARPA funding, which is the American Rescue Plan Act funding that came from the Biden administration. And so that was a really big shot in the arm from the initial $3 million that we started with. So to date, we have funded 330 total projects across the state. It's a pretty even split on where those projects are located between northern, central, and southern Utah. A few more projects are located up in northern Utah than southern Utah, but it's pretty even across the board. Of those 330 projects, we only have 98 projects that have been fully completed. And what we're looking for a fully completed project is that it's all the way installed. And then the project has also been in use for a whole irrigation season. And this is when we start collecting data about how much water the producer or the farmer is using on their farm after they've used it for a whole irrigation season. And so it's been brought up sometimes in the media and other places that we don't have any data and we don't know what we're doing with the program. But it still is just very, very young in terms of what we have accomplished. And very, very few of our projects are all the way done and have been used for a whole irrigation season. We expect that number to jump a lot this upcoming year. So we're looking forward to this upcoming irrigation season and to start getting a lot of that data rolling in that people are interested in. But we're still just at the very beginning stages of a lot of our projects. It seems like maybe it's been a long time since 2019, but again, like we hear a lot, the COVID pandemic was a huge disruptor for us to be able to get pipe, sprinkler parts, pivot systems. It was almost a year delay on a lot of these systems. So it really was a setback for us, and we're just catching up from that. So an irrigation season typically runs from April 15th to October 1st. And as these projects are completed and go into effect, then we will monitor water use through those flow meters that we installed on every single project. And then at the end of the irrigation season, we collect that data and we can see specifically and exactly what water was used on that crop field. So to date, we've been able to contract about $64 million of the total allocation that we were given. And of that $64 million, about $20 million has been paid out. So we've obligated a lot of money. We haven't paid out that full amount yet. So like I said, we're just getting going and we're looking forward to this season. Projects are getting completed all the time as we go. And so we'll have some good data to begin sharing as we move forward. So just wanted to touch briefly on what's the difference between water rights and water shares. We have heard a lot with new legislation through Water Optimization Program that water right holders would be able to conserve water and split their water right and then be able to lease that to other entities. So maybe lease it to go to the Great Salt Lake, or lease it to stay in a river, or lease it to stay in a reservoir for a fish, or a lot of other opportunities. And it's a really cool change that we've had in our water rights law that allows more conservation and better conservation to happen. But what we run into is that a huge part of our agricultural producers don't own any water rights. They actually are shareholders, and I'd like to touch on the difference of what those are. So water rights, just in a nutshell, is a right that an individual has to divert water from a point. So they can divert water from a reservoir, they can take it directly from a river or a stream, it can come directly from groundwater, and they have a right to whatever they have. A certain amount is allocated to whatever their water right is. And that water has to be used for the specific purpose that is designated on that right. So some water rights are for municipalities. Some water rights are for agriculture. Some water rights are only for livestock water. And so as the water is used or pulled from the point where it's stored, whether a reservoir, groundwater, a river, the water is metered from that point and is measured. And the Division of Water Rights knows, they set the measurement amount, they set the amount of water that can be used, and then they monitor how much water is being used from those diversion points. So for example, a canal company usually has a really large water right that covers a lot of acres. And then under that canal company are all of our farmers that are shareholders of that water right, which means they have a share of the underlying water right that's held by the canal company. And so canal companies are regulated just the same. The water is metered from where it's taken from the reservoir or the river. And then they report back to the Division of Water Rights. So it's heavily metered and monitored how much water agriculture is using. And then you can see here a large portion of all agricultural water rights in the Great Salt Lake Basin are held by irrigation or canal companies. So in the Great Salt Lake, we don't have a lot of groundwater that we're pumping. Most of it is surface water that comes from our rivers and lakes and reservoirs, as one of the main reasons that reservoirs were built back in the age of pioneers. And so then if we look at the other side for water shareholders, like I mentioned, water shareholders have a right to use a portion or a share of an overarching water right. So a big water right that covers a lot of acres. My acres are a part of that, so I have a share of that water right. Shareholders are usually members of an irrigation or canal company. So there's a company that owns the water right, and then shareholders underneath that company. Usually the shareholders can vote of a board or a committee that makes decisions on their behalf regarding their water right. Water shares are allocated to specific acreages in specific amounts. So usually one share will be for 1 acre of water. And so if you have 50 acres, then you have 50 shares of water within that water right on there. So just two different things that I think gets overlooked a lot with water rights and water shareholders. So the shares kind of act like a co-op of the water right for our farmers and ranchers. And as you get further south, in central and southern Utah, a lot of farmers are water right holders because they're bringing water up from the ground and using groundwater, and that's a water right. Where you see canals being used, we call it surface water, and those are usually water shareholders that have canals on that. So let me move to the next slide. So I'd like to take a minute and talk about alfalfa. Alfalfa is a hot topic that we get asked often about here at the Department of Ag. It's been given a really bad rap, especially in the media, and I've even heard it called the green plague, which is really funny to me. I grow alfalfa personally. I have a small farm. A lot of my neighbors grow alfalfa, and so I just like to take a minute and clear the air, if you will, and talk about why we grow alfalfa in the state of Utah and the benefit that it is to our farmers. So if we just look quickly at the bottom, alfalfa is globally considered the queen of forages and is grown on about 6 million acres of cropland in 11 western United States. So you can see the states listed there on the bottom, and this is according to the United States Department of Agriculture. One main question I get asked a lot is, why isn't alfalfa grown somewhere else where there's more water or where there's more rain? And the short answer is you cannot grow alfalfa somewhere else. It needs long periods of hot, dry temperatures in order to cure and get into a bale. And so you can see there's only 11 states in the Western United States that can properly grow and bale alfalfa to cure it and be able to transport it to other states in the nation. So we're just one of 11 places in the whole nation that we can grow alfalfa. And it's a very important economic crop for us in Utah. So the things that alfalfa is a desert plant. It is highly suitable to drought. It's highly suitable to salty soils. It loves the desert climate, and it needs the desert climate in order to be able to harvest alfalfa. It's also very drought tolerant. You can really drought alfalfa and it'll go dormant. It sends down deep tap roots into the soil, and some of them are 16, 18, 24 inches deep, so it can really access deep water in the soil profile, and that helps it be more drought resilient. It's a very high yielding crop, so we can get multiple crops of alfalfa on one field every single year. Typically, we get 4 crops of alfalfa. In some places, they can get 5 or 6 crops every single year. Alfalfa is a perennial plant, which means it doesn't have to be planted every year. Usually we plant alfalfa once and it'll last about 6 to 7 years before it starts to get burnt out. And what that means and other things to consider is it saves a lot of cost for our farmers. So we're not running a tractor and planting crops every single year when we have alfalfa in our field. It reduces our carbon footprint. We're not burning diesel fuel in our tractor because we'd only have to plant it once every 6 or 7 years, which is great for our air quality compared to annual crops like a corn or wheat that has to be planted every single year. In terms of the calories and the protein and the fiber that we get to feed our animals, alfalfa is extremely water efficient for the protein and calories and fiber that it produces for animal feed. And like I mentioned before, it's perfectly suited for Utah's climate. It likes temperature variation, so cool nights, hot days makes alfalfa flourish. We need heat and sunlight and hot periods of hot and dry to be able to bale alfalfa and store it. And alfalfa does really well in salty soils. So that's one thing we have abundantly here in the Great Salt Lake Basin is salty soils, and alfalfa performs well in those soils. Alfalfa fixes nitrogen into the soil, which is such a cool feature because it's a legume. It can fix nitrogen, so it pulls nitrogen out of the atmosphere and fixes it in the soil to be used for other crops. So quite often following an alfalfa crop, it has stored so much nitrogen in the soil that if we come behind it with a corn crop, we don't have to use any commercial fertilizer because the alfalfa has pulled the fertilizer from the air into the soil for us. It helps control wind and water erosion because it sprouts and then spreads out across the soil and covers the soil to help control erosion. We have fabulous established markets here in the state of Utah, and it's one of the things that we are known for growing. We also have an international reputation. We get asked a lot that all we do is ship our alfalfa to China. That's a very small percentage of the alfalfa that we grow goes overseas. About 18% is what Utah State estimates actually leaves the nation and goes overseas. And not just to China, Israel has a large dairy market as well. So about 18% of the alfalfa we grow leaves the state and goes international. About 50% of the alfalfa we grow in the state of Utah stays right here, and we support our dairy industry, our beef industry, and our sheep industry with the alfalfa that we grow. And that remaining about 30% goes elsewhere in the United States where they can't grow alfalfa, like Texas. We actually ship a lot of alfalfa to California. Even though they can grow alfalfa there, they usually grow other more higher value crops. So California grows strawberries and ships them to us. We grow alfalfa and ship it to California for their dairies. Alfalfa has a lot of natural pest tolerance, so we need very little herbicide, very little chemical to control weeds. It's actually what's called allelopathic, so it sends out a chemical in the soil to control weeds. It kills weeds so they don't compete with itself. And it has a low risk of becoming invasive unlike other forages that you might look at growing. Alfalfa can be easily terminated if needed. And so this is just a snapshot of all of the reasons that we grow alfalfa. Alfalfa uses about 30 to 32 inches of water every year. We're getting better. We have varieties of alfalfa now that can use as little as 28 inches. And to keep that in perspective, your lawn uses about 30 inches of water every year. Alfalfa is just grown on a much bigger scale than the average lawn. And so when we get better at growing alfalfa and become more efficient in our irrigation, it's just a larger pool of water that we have available to help with the needs that we have around the state on there. So I love being able to talk about alfalfa. One other thing I get asked a lot is, why don't we just grow something else? And I like to point out that it's not like a light switch. So we don't have the capacity to just switch really quickly to growing a different crop because we don't have means to process it. If we were to just grow large scale field tomatoes, for example, we don't have anything anywhere close in the state of Utah to process that volume of tomatoes. And so we can't just switch really quickly. We do have options to process grains, and we do grow a lot of winter wheat. We do grow a lot of corn, and we have options to process those. But it just is something that we have to plan for the infrastructure if we're going to switch crops. And usually the infrastructure comes where the crops are grown. And so in Utah, we've established alfalfa as one of our main cash crops, and we have the industry to support that around the state of Utah. And then lastly, I just like to end with this slide. It's one of my favorite slides that likes to keep into context the water that we use in agriculture and what we're doing with that water. So I'll explain really quickly that you can see in these bar graphs here, or in these bars here. So the mean annual precipitation is how much average rainfall, snow, precipitation in general that we get in the state of Utah every single year. And you can see over on the right, we get about 61 million acre feet of water every single year, which is just seems like a huge volume, but we are in a desert. Other places get much more than that. So 61 million acre feet is what we start with every single year on average in the state of Utah. So the mean annual diversion, you can see there says 7.7%. And what that means is how much water are humans, for every purpose, taking water out of the natural system. And you see the total there is about 4.7 million acre feet of water. And so that's for our homes, that's for our businesses, that's for industry and agriculture. Anything that a human does to take water out of the natural system in Utah, we only take about 7.7% of all of the water that we get in the state of Utah. And so you see 56.5 million acre feet of water stays in nature, stays in our streams, stays in Great Salt Lake, stays in our other reservoirs. It just remains in nature and is not touched for human use. So down below, I like to put in perspective that agriculture diverts about 80%, so 79% of that 7.7% is what agriculture uses in the state of Utah, which accounts for about 3.7 million acre feet is used for agriculture. And then you can see the other uses here for landscape irrigation in our homes, and then what industries use outside of landscape irrigation. You can see the volumes of water there. And so when you look at the total, the 61 million acre feet of water that the state of Utah gets every year, ag uses 3.7 million. So even though it's a large portion of the diverted water, or the water we take out of nature, it's very small in comparison to all of the water that we get in the state of Utah. And again, this is statewide. This isn't just for Great Salt Lake. This is an average across the state of Utah. And so I like to keep that in perspective, that yes, ag does use water, but it really is in perspective a small amount of all the water that the state of Utah gets. And so with that, the last thing I'll just like to close on, I just have some contact info up here if anybody would like to reach out. But the last point that I would like to make is that the legislature invested $200 million in the last legislative session to go towards agricultural water optimization. And that is an astronomical number, just a huge number of taxpayer dollars. And we don't take lightly the investment that the state has made in agriculture to help better address our water concerns and our water issues in the state. But I like to point out again that that is to cover 50% of the project cost. And the other 50% is coming out of the pocket of our farmers and ranchers. They are bringing their private money to the table to help put these systems in. As we optimize water use, yes, it is a benefit to their farm to be able to be less labor intensive and more efficiently use their water, but they are also footing the other half of the bill of that 200 million. And so if that isn't a nod from the agricultural community to say we're here, we're at the table, we're showing up with our water and our money to help solve Utah's water issues, I don't think that there's a bigger nod than that. And I'm so grateful for the ag community stepping up and being able to make that available and help with the precious resource that we have in the state of Utah. So with that, I will stop sharing my slides and then we can maybe have a conversation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Hannah. That was a lot of data and a lot of really good information. You covered the breadth of a ton of things all at once. So thank you for that. And
You're welcome.
I'm glad that there is so much as of the date of this recording in the news about agriculture and its use and farmers. And so to provide an extra perspective is always valuable and something that we at the library always love being able to share and provide extra information for greater context, clarity, and being able to see a fuller picture. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I did like seeing all the advocation for alfalfa because I didn't know any of that, but that was very interesting.
Good. I'm glad.
All right, so yeah, you're right about having conversations. So we do have some questions from our community if you're ready and willing to answer some.
Yes, I would love to.
All right, it looks like a lot of you actually covered in the slides, but for example, maybe we can just expand on your personal experiences because I've heard that you actually go out and meet with farmers one-on-one. If you want to describe that experience, that's great. But like basically, you described how the incentive program works, how it just closed, and the process of it going through, the funding that's been getting through. But what kinds of projects have been done? I know there was a slide dedicated to canals and to sprinkling systems and drip and alternative irrigations, but is there any other types of things that you're seeing? Any creative innovations, personal stories, anecdotes, whatever you want to take that?
Yeah, we actually were really excited. This year, there was a big push to do subsurface drip systems, which is not new technology, but something that's very new here in the state of Utah. And so we saw a lot of applications come in for those subsurface drip. So different from regular drip in that it is installed in the soil at about 8 inches and is left there for a period of 6 to 10 years in the soil. And so we're excited to see how those work and some of those systems so that the water is never at the surface. It's enclosed the whole way from the delivery to the crop root. And so that will be really interesting to see. We have also some automated flood systems that use soil moisture sensors. So we run water across the field and then the moisture sensor will notify you. Essentially, it calls you on the phone when the water is to the sensor and say it's time to move to the next set, and it'll automatically switch to the next round of irrigation that is needed based on soil moisture. So we have some cool innovations happening as we go around the state. One thing that's interesting to me is we call them our early adopters. So our farmers that are really innovative and want to try something new right now. And then we have the majority that just sit back and see how that works. Maybe 1 or 2 irrigation seasons. Let's see how that works for him. Then I'll think about it. So we're really in that stage with a lot of our latest and greatest technology. We have a lot of them going in this irrigation season. And so I think a lot of farmers will see how that works. And we're going to host some field days to get people to other people's farms and see and ask questions and do some of those things. So I'm excited about that.
That's so neat. And so do the subsoil ones, do they degrade over time with like corrosion or I don't know how they're built, but like since you gave a lifespan of about 6 to 10 years, I'm assuming they have to get replaced after a certain point.
Yeah. Yep. I think they have to get replaced. I think the salt will play an issue. So we'll see how the salts in the soil interact. And then gophers is the other big issue that's been brought up because they chew on it and eat it and poke holes in it. And so rodent control and some of those things that we might not think about will play into that lifespan.
Life and gopher happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the field days, are those for public to attend or is that farmer specific or what are field days?
Yeah, I think they're open for anybody. It depends on who's hosting it, but if anybody in the public would like to attend, I'm sure we could make an announcement of those on our website. Our focus would be on farmers and getting farmers and farmers together. So maybe somebody that is, installed a new system that isn't widely used, to get other farmers there to ask questions on that level, farm to farm. But yeah, Utah State also hosts some wonderful irrigation field days that are available to everybody as well.
Awesome. Thank you for letting the community know that. Let's see. Are farmers hesitant to get on board with water optimization conservation? Because news again shows like a slow build, or not a lot's being tapped into per se. But like, if they are they hesitant? And if they are, what are some of the reasons that they're hesitant to get on board?
Yeah, we have experienced some hesitancy with our farmers, and the main reason is they're afraid that the state of Utah is going to take their water. That's their resource that they live and die by. And what, rumors fly that maybe some of these programs will be an avenue for the state of Utah to say, hey, we gave you money, now we're taking your water, which is entirely untrue, but that's the fear that's out there. So that's the biggest barrier that we have. It's just that fear, a general fear of the government. Farmers definitely like to keep to themselves and keep their head down and work hard and feed all of the rest of us. And so I always laugh that I tell them, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. And that's our stand-in joke. And so one thing that we like to do, we have conservation planners around the state that are just part of the local ag community. They work where they live. They're neighbors, they are in the coffee shop. And so I think they bring a huge level of comfort to our farmers. A lot of our employees are farmers themselves that are also helping to grow this program in the state. And so I think that that's been beneficial, to feel like a farmer is talking to a farmer, not just an agency staff in the government that might not know anything about farming.
That does help. That's cool. That being able to connect on that level.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. You talked a great deal about alfalfa, and so let's see if I can rephrase the question a little bit so it can be more universal. But like, why or how do farmers get 60% of Utah's water? How does that work, and why does it work that way?
Yeah. So Utah is a state that lives under, it's called a prior appropriations law, which is a fancy way of saying if you were the first to lay claim on the water, you are the first to get a right to that water. And so that's how our water rights work. And so, historically, Utah was an agricultural community. As the pioneers came and settled here, they needed water. And so clear back in the 1800s, they started filing on water rights. So some of the oldest water rights in the state of Utah are agricultural water rights. And the largest volume of water rights are agricultural rights, because that's our state's history. And so that's where those percentages come from, in terms of agriculture having the right to use that volume of water in the state, is because, they were filed on centuries ago. And then as the state has developed, we call them junior water rights, or anything that is, in the 1950s or 1960s, that those water rights were filed on, are junior water rights. And so in a nutshell, that's the reason that ag has so much water, is because we were the first to file on it. And that is the law that we operate under in the state of Utah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarity.
Yeah.
Since again, question pertains to alfalfa and wasting it on thirsty plants. Maybe if you have this data at hand, what other crops are grown in Utah? Like, what percentage is alfalfa, and do you know what other kind of things that are grown by farmers that help feed our community and nation, and then internationally?
Yeah, I should have grabbed those percentages on hand of alfalfa. I have some percentages. I can even share them with you if you want to spread the information about the percentage of alfalfa grown specifically in Great Salt Lake Basin and then statewide. So there's some cool graphs, but we grow a lot of other great crops in alfalfa. Other than alfalfa, a lot of corn production, both silage corn and field corn, which is, used for all sorts of grain. Winter wheat, we grow barley. In northern Utah, we grow a lot of onions. and pumpkins, and then a lot of our smaller producers grow some more specialty crops, but on a large scale, those are some of our large scale crops. And then Utah also just has a fantastic protein industry in terms of over 80% of the state is owned by the state or federal. They're not for public lands, they're not privately owned land. And you can't grow crops on those lands, but one thing we can do is grow really valuable protein products in beef and sheep industry that go out and graze on Forest Service and public lands and then come back and as a really valuable product. I think Utah produces something like 500% of the protein we consume in the state of Utah. So just a great protein production there on lands that can't be used for crop production.
Cool. Thank you for that, random tidbit because you answered a lot on alfalfa. It's like, okay, how can we broaden perspectives even more? So thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
I think we have one last question, and then we'll go to any wrap-up thoughts. Are the water optimization efforts bringing more water to Great Salt Lake?
Such a great question. And I tried to clarify just a little that, like I said, we're really in baby stages of where we're at. But already with Senate Bill 277 passing, which is our last legislation that we're operating under that allows us to use our water for something other than agriculture. I see that as a shift that's coming specifically in our irrigation companies. I think may be interested in leasing water to Great Salt Lake, or if we look at some of that to get water to the lake, and we know that that's the catalyst that has driven this vast funding pool that we have is Great Salt Lake. And so we don't take lightly that we need to be able to show what we're doing. And we're doing that with those meters. We'll be able to show here's the water that we're using versus the water that we're taking out. And can we leave some? Do we need all of it? What does the weather look like? And we can make quicker real-time decisions as we automate these systems, but it's not really a quick process. We think took 20, 30, 40 years for our pioneers to dig canals and get water to flow where it does. And so to upgrade some of these systems is going to take maybe 10 years or so. And it feels like the problem is more urgent than 10 years, but we're just doing the best we can with the reality of what we have and are working towards those goals.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. And things take time. So
yeah. And then throw COVID in the mix and it takes more time. So we're catching up finally.
Yes. Do you have any final wrap-up thoughts before we end our conversation today?
I just am appreciative. I thank you for reaching out. I am happy to be available to answer questions. If any of your viewers have questions, I hope that they can view the agricultural community not like as a they that are over there in our own little bubble, but we're here. We want to tell our story. We want to show what we're doing and why and how we're using our precious resource to benefit all of us in Utah, to feed all of us and to sustain agriculture and to take care of the environment that we're in as well.
Thank you. And of course, we love having you on here. One of the biggest goals of Let's Be Neighbors is connection and being able to see not a they versus them, but it's an us. And we are so grateful for the opportunity to have you on behalf of farmers and being a farmer yourself, sharing the story of our neighbors, our farmer neighbors, because they literally are, and they help provide so much for us. So we're so grateful for that opportunity. So thank you for being a neighbor with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And then before we close, I'll invite anyone who's listening to this to reach out to Hannah. I believe your contact info was on one of the slides, and if you have any questions to hear more stories or more connection to have a greater understanding, reach out to her. I invite you to do so. So thank you guys for listening in. Thank you, Hannah, for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes. All right. Well, we will see everyone next time. So take care, everyone.